Careful with that. We're going to switch over to some sports news right now. The topic of paying college athletes will go before the U.S. Supreme Court. The justices have agreed to review a court decision that could be the first step in making historic changes from the university to television networks, even shoe companies. Everyone gets to have a piece of the revenue from college sports, except for the guys who are taking the hits and shooting the baskets. Our very own Andrew Kraft speaks with Dan Lust, a sports law expert, about this Supreme Court case.
All right, so the question right now, should college athletes be paid or compensated? This is a question that the Supreme Court will take up in next year's session. We're being joined now by Daniel Lust. He's a sports law expert who's going to break down this case for us that will go before the Supreme Court next year. You know, Dan, what are these two parties going to be contesting in front of the court?
So, essentially what we have is amateurism is basically on trial. I mean, it's not actually on trial because we're at the Supreme Court where we just have fancy oral arguments, no cross-examinations with witnesses going on the stand. But what's really in question here is something that has not come in front of the Supreme Court in really 3 decades. That's whether the NCAA can put caps on what players can earn. And it's a very fundamental question across the country, from Florida to California, where states are passing legislation. So, we have 3 branches of government, Andrew. We had the legislator weighing in, and now we have the court. So this is one that is reaching the highest levels of government at this point.
And so the parties, the NCAA and this former player from West Virginia, why is it being argued on an antitrust level? Like, what's the rationale for that argument legally?
Yeah, so I think at a fundamental level, antitrust is a way to prevent big businesses from having too much control, either over an industry or over their employees. So for any number of reasons, where you see the news, Apple is being hit with antitrust claims, Google, because they're too powerful. In Major League Baseball, they have an actual carved out antitrust exemption, which allows them to really do whatever they want over their players. And there's obviously a union that can work around some of those antitrust exemptions. Why it's a little more sensitive in the NCAA is because there is no union, right? These athletes are kind of at the whim of the conferences, of the athletic directors, of whatever they want to say. So, in general, in our world, right, in the United States of America, there's a free market, right? People can make a living and make themselves, something out of nothing. But when it comes to the NCAA, there are very clear caps in place on what athletes can earn in college. This is by no means a free market economy like a LeBron James can earn a significant salary in free agency. We do not have that. But Andrew, the question is, why are college coaches allowed to go to the highest bidder, right? Why are athletic facilities allowed to be, worth millions of dollars when the athletes are getting very little? So that's the question really at a fundamental level. Why are colleges allowed to exert this level of control without any type of antitrust scrutiny? So that's really what's going to be really on the docket for the court come this spring 2021 term.
And didn't the NCAA come out recently, just this year, and kind of gave college athletes an opportunity to kind of cash in on their likeness? So you have these two announcements kind of on parallel tracks, that the NCAA is kind of softening their stance a little bit. Is that right? Can you talk about that from earlier?
Yeah, I mean, to make it a fun analogy, it's like the scene in Star Wars. The walls are literally closing in, right? You have the legislature and you have the courts that are closing in. So really, in a fundamental level, there's something called federalism in the law. If a state makes a law, they can do that so long as the federal government has not weighed in. So California has passed their own version of athlete compensation to allow their athletes to get paid. That's going to come into effect 2023. Florida then jumped them. That's going to come into effect in this next January of July 2021. So still, Andrew, and the NCAA has not allowed athletes to get paid. So you have a world where there could be states, right, be it University of Florida, Miami, Florida State, where those athletes can go to those schools and get paid a certain amount of money. So that's why we've heard all this kind of barking. This even today, coincidentally, there's been a bill that's been posed on bipartisan lines, to try to get athletes paid, and at the federal level. To the extent something comes in that'll really bail the NCAA out, because that'll prevent Florida and California from having these different laws. But the legislator is really picking up, right? We have very few issues in our country that are true bipartisan issues. And this is really coming up across all various states. So sports betting was becoming legalized. The cannabis industry was becoming legalized. And now people are really turning their attention to athlete compensation. So I think that's the next wave of legislation that keeps pushing us towards that goal line.
Yeah, just to reference what you were referring to, that was Senator Wicker of Mississippi and Senator Rubio of Florida, who have announced the Collegiate Athlete and Compensation Rights Act. Democratic senators are expected to introduce their own version of that. Going forward into next year, what do you think? How do you think the court will fall on this case? Remember, we have a new conservative majority on the court. It's 6-3 now with Judge Amy Coney Barrett as the newest member. Is that what you're kind of looking for now? How do you think the Supreme Court will ultimately rule on this?
So here's the interesting analysis, and you're right. You took the words out of my mouth. There is a now very weighted conservative bench. So I guess so people are aware, the players won, right? The NCAA lost at the lower court level, and then they lost again at the appellate level. So they didn't lose so much. It wasn't a complete overhaul of all caps. Basically, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals allowed some of these limitations to keep in place. So by the NCAA asking for the Supreme Court to weigh on in this case, what they do risk in this is that the NCAA says, or the Supreme Court says, hey, these lower courts didn't go far enough in removing your caps, right? Maybe there should be a true free market. So that's what's really on the table. It's not really just, are we going to uphold these limited caps? There could be a whole rewriting of the opinion. And that's not something we're necessarily going to know until the spring. But really, to your point, I mean, I think people need to be aware. These cases do not go to the Supreme Court. Again, I don't mean to understate this. It's been 30 years since the amateurism question in college has gone to the Supreme Court. So the court's willingness to take this case is basically saying there might be something new here. So that required 4 justices. We don't know which. We do not know that, but at least 4 to accept the writ of certiorari and to take the case. So, I think it's anyone's bet. But if it's me, if I'm a betting man, I think, people are weighing the pulse of this issue. And it seems to be one that should enact change. So I don't think the Supreme Court takes this case to institute the status quo. I think if you were making odds on this, so to speak, I think the NCAA could come down here and really chip away at that NCAA amateurism limitations.
Yeah, and Dan, just to talk about that lower court ruling that you were mentioning, this is according to the Associated Press, but the NCAA had said that ruling effectively created a pay-for-play system for all student athletes, allowing them to be paid both unlimited amounts for participating in quote-unquote internships and an additional $5,600 or more each year they remain eligible to play their sports. Dan, right now for collegiate athletes in the NCAA, what can they do, if anything at all, to kind of recoup on their name, on their likeness? Is there any outlet for them to be paid as it stands right now, or no?
Very little, and I would say very little without the fear of ruining your eligibility at the school. I think that's really this gray zone we are operating in when we have basically it's not like Major League Baseball. There's we'll say a quasi carve out at the Supreme Court level for amateurism. So I don't know. I don't think it's very clear right now what athletes can do. But Andrew, to the point, to the segment that you just read, that little provision of what the NCAA is saying. I mean, am I going to risk, if I'm a high level athlete at the college level, $5,600 for my eligibility for an entire year? I don't know if I'm going to take that. So by no means is there a true free market economy. I think that's really debate. I think if you kind of polled really anybody else outside of the NCAA, they would say athletes should get paid. It's just a matter of how much. But right now, it's very limited. You really can't really make what you should be earning. A guy like Zion Williamson, everybody was watching his games last year. The guy made $0, now has his own separate litigation for, God forbid, signing with an agent during college to maximize his revenue. So that's really an overhauling of that concept that's being done at the NCAA level. And again, to an earlier point you brought up, the walls are closing in because it's really the legislature and now the courts that are taking on this issue. So I don't think it would surprise anyone if this reaches, really the White House at a certain point in time.
And like you mentioned, just lastly, there is kind of bipartisan support. There also is a lot of public support for this. So it seems that the only roadblock right now is the governing body of student athletes, the NCAA. And from their point of view, isn't it their point of view that essentially, especially athletes on scholarship, they're getting a world-class college education, and that should be essentially enough. Is that kind of too simplistic of a view?
I think it is too simplistic, but I actually think that's essentially what they're saying. They've said this term a lot when it's come up in the name, image, and likeness context. They want to put guardrails in place to prevent these college athletes from resembling pros. Now, the problem as a sports fan, we understand, at least in the world of college basketball, and you guys will know with DeAndre Ayton, who's a one and done type player, I'm not really sure what the value is for protecting a college athlete for 1 year of education, right? We're not requiring these guys to stay 4 years in college, right? NBA has a one and done rule. College football has a 3 years removed from high school rule. So I'm not really sure why we need to protect these athletes for 1 year. If you can go to war at the age of 18, right, and you could do any number of things at the age of 18, I'm not sure why you can't get paid to play college basketball or college football. And I understand that on a higher level, the NCAA is trying to protect these athletes. But that's really what we've seen on a professional sports level, right? Player empowerment has been key across specifically National Basketball Association with LeBron James. And that's slowly and surely making its way to the college ranks with guys like Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields starting a campaign to try to bring Big Ten football back. So we're seeing seeds of these across college sports. And I think that's what we're getting to, right? Why do we need to protect these college athletes? They're 18 years old. If they're really generating millions, if not billions for the universities, why are we capping their earnings to $5,000? I don't think that's something that's getting any support, really, to your point earlier, to anybody else outside of the NCAA.
So I just wanted another last question here for you. What about the college athletes themselves? Do they have a union? Do they have representatives who are working on their behalf? Are there coaches in support of this? Who is, kind of vying on their behalf to get them paid, if anyone at all?
Yeah, there is it's again a little bit of a gray zone, and there are some coaches that have come out over the years very much in support of this. But it's kind of a taboo as a college coach to say that, because it's almost taking money out of your pocket. Some of these college coaches across the country are legitimately the highest paid state employee. So to basically favor athletes getting paid, in a sense, kind of takes it away from you. But I think there should be, at a fundamental level, if you're going to allow athletes to get paid, they should have the right to speak with a financial advisor or an agent to try to maximize that right. That is not something that is clearly allowed for in the NCAA. I know there's been talks to potentially allow that. But to the extent that the NCAA does follow through on at least their promise to come forward with their own name, image, and likeness guidelines, there will be committees set up to kind of vet any type of endorsements that comes through. So there is supposed to be an administrative and a skeletal system put in place to kind of vet any of these deals. But again, I guess I should just kind of, for people watching this time frame, Florida has enacted this legislation. July of 2021 is the first time that comes in. So really the NCAA kind of has a ticking time bomb on their hands. If the Supreme Court doesn't rule, right, if there's no federal legislation that comes into play, there is a world where Florida is going to get a massive recruiting edge if they're the only state in the country allowed to pay their athletes. So that's really what's happening here. It's, and no pun intended, it's really the wild, wild west. There is no system in place right now, absent the NCAA coming forward. So a lot of fireworks going to come in the next couple months on the college front.
Well, and we'll be watching that here, all on News Now from Fox. Dan, thanks so much for joining us here tonight. Appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure.
You're watching News Now from Fox. That was a great conversation between Andrew Kraft and Dan Luss, that sports law expert right there. Definitely an interesting story that we'll be keeping our eyes on. But the big story of tonight is Moderna getting that final approval